Royalty is often remembered as dazzling figures wrapped in silks, crowned with jewels, and radiating elegance. Yet behind the shining images passed down in paintings and court records lies a truth so foul it shatters the myth of refinement. Beneath the gold and velvet, the rulers of Europe lived in filth. Their perfumes, silks, and ceremonies were not signs of purity, but disguises for a world where bathing was rare, waste was routine, and stench was inescapable. Perfume became the armor of nobility. For men and women alike, it was sprayed, splashed, rubbed, and soaked into every layer of fabric until the air of the court was thick with competing clouds of musk, rose, civet, and ambergris. This was not a quest for subtle fragrance. It was survival. Without soap and bathing, the human body festered. Skin was coated with oils, sweat, and the grime of unwashed months. Clothes became stiff with layers of residue. A nobleman might wear the same embroidered coat for weeks, never once cleaned, until it reeked so heavily that only the strongest perfume could cover the rot. The result was a strange arms race of scent. Whoever could mask their filth most convincingly won the game of elegance. But perfumes did not erase the reality underneath. They mixed with sweat and rot, producing new stenches, sickly sweet, nauseating, almost unbearable. Visitors from cultures with strong bathing traditions were often horrified. To them, the European courts did not smell like refinement, but like death disguised as roses. Still, in the strange logic of the nobility, perfume was a marker of superiority. The stronger the fragrance, the higher the rank. And so, the court became a battlefield of odors, where elegance meant drowning decay under layers of artificial beauty. Nowhere was the contradiction more grotesque than in the position known as the groom of the stool. This man was not a servant in the ordinary sense. He was among the most powerful figures in the kingdom, entrusted with an intimate duty few today could even imagine. His job was to manage the king's bodily functions, literally to assist him on the toilet, to wipe him clean, and to ensure that the royal excrement was handled with dignity. To us, it sounds degrading. To them, it was the pinnacle of honor. The groom of the stool had unrivaled access to the monarch in his most private moments. In an age where proximity to power was everything, holding the chamber pot could be more influential than commanding an army. It is hard to overstate the psychological impact of this. Imagine a courtier, dressed in finery, bowing deeply as he approaches the king's stool. He kneels, not to hear policy or give counsel, but to handle waste. And yet, in that moment, he whispers in the king's ear, gains his trust, learns secrets of state that generals and ministers would never hear. The throne of power, in its most literal sense, was shared with the man who held the cloth. This reveals the strange inversion at the heart of royal hygiene. Filth was not avoided, but elevated. The body of the monarch was sacred, and so even its waste became a symbol of divine right. To serve that body in its most natural and degrading functions was to step closer to power than any nobleman could through bloodline or military conquest. Dirt and dignity existed side by side, woven together in a fabric that defined the very essence of European monarchy. And yet, as grotesque as these details may seem, they were only the beginning. Perfume and chamber pots were merely the surface of a deeper story, a story of deliberate rejection of soap, suspicion of water, and acts of charity that poisoned those most desperate for relief. The courts of Europe were not just places of vanity, they were theaters of filth, where appearances mattered more than reality, and where the very air was thick with a perfume that barely hid the stench of decay. To modern eyes, soap is so ordinary that it feels eternal. Yet in the courts of Europe, it was treated with suspicion, sometimes even fear. During the Middle Ages and well into the Renaissance, entire kingdoms came to view soap as an enemy of health and water as a dangerous luxury. What began as a quirk of culture hardened into a rule of survival. Bathing, people believed, opened the pores and weakened the body. Water was seen not as a cleanser, but as a carrier of illness, a highway through which invisible demons entered the flesh. And so instead of washing, the wealthy perfected the art of covering dirt. Religion gave weight to this superstition. In Spain, the Inquisition eyed regular bathing with deep mistrust. To them, the practice of washing was a suspicious echo of Islam or Judaism, traditions already marked as dangerous and heretical. A Christian noble who bathed too often risked being accused of foreign sympathies, even of treason. And so filth became a badge of loyalty. The less one bathed, the more one proved their devotion. Cleanliness was not next to godliness, but dangerously close to heresy. In this climate, perfume became a kind of spiritual shield. While water threatened the soul, scent promised safety. Oils and powders were rubbed into the skin, sealing it against the imagined dangers of bathing. Courtiers dabbed their wrists and necks with heavy fragrances, believing that the aromas would not only mask foul odors, but also defend against disease. For the nobility, refusing soap was not neglect. It was a mark of piety and wisdom. But even the perfumes were not enough. Nobles sought ever more extravagant methods to preserve their skin from decay. One of the strangest was the milk bath. Women of the court, eager to maintain a pale and youthful complexion, would soak in tubs filled with cows' or donkeys' milk. The ritual seemed innocent, even luxurious. Yet milk left in the open air quickly soured. Within hours, it became a breeding ground for bacteria. Nobles were not just bathing in milk, they were immersing themselves in rot. And what was left over from these indulgences did not go to waste. In acts that were celebrated as charity, the sour milk was distributed to the poor. It was said to be a gift from the nobles, proof of their generosity. But in reality, it was poison. The spoiled milk carried disease into the villages, spreading illness among those least able to resist it. The same gift repeated in countless towns, countless seasons, until charity became indistinguishable from slow-motion massacre. The irony did not end there. The same pattern played out in other gifts. Old garments, infested with lice, were donated to peasants as tokens of goodwill. Leftover meat, already rancid, was handed out at festivals. Even the bread served at church feasts was sometimes contaminated with mold. The nobles, secure in their own perfumed world, saw no danger in this. To them, generosity was a performance, not a responsibility. That the poor fell ill afterward was invisible, or worse, considered proof of their weakness. Nowhere was this more tragically clear than in the rituals of communion. In some courts, infected chalices passed from lip to lip, spreading plague and pox in the very moment meant to sanctify. Faith was believed to shield the soul, but no prayer shielded the body. And yet the ceremonies continued, repeated again and again, even as disease stalked the congregations. In these patterns we glimpse a chilling truth. The courts of Europe did not simply neglect hygiene. They weaponized their ignorance, passing down sickness as though it were grace. Their gifts carried parasites. Their charity spread contagion. And all the while they saw themselves as benevolent, chosen, and superior. It is tempting to laugh at the absurdity of perfume clouds and milk baths, but the laughter dies quickly when one remembers the consequences. Behind the rituals of scent and superstition lay thousands of wasted lives, entire generations weakened by preventable disease. To live near a royal court was not a blessing. It was a risk, a gamble in which the poor always lost. And still, the story does not end here. For beyond perfumes, beyond soap, beyond poisoned milk, lay another horror. This one hidden in plain sight, woven into the very hair on their heads. If perfume was the mask of royalty and milk their poisoned gift, then hair was their crown of horror. To walk into a European court of the 17th century was to enter a forest of wigs, towering, powdered, and crawling with life. These were not mere accessories. They were symbols of power, status, and fashion, each carefully constructed from horsehair, goat hair, or even the shorn locks of peasants. But beneath the layers of powder and pomade, these wigs became ecosystems of rot. Lice, fleas, and even maggots thrived in the humid nests of hair and sweat. Courtiers, desperate to maintain appearances, scratched furiously with ornate silver combs. Some carried long sticks tipped with claws, discreetly sliding them under their wigs during banquets to soothe the itch. The white powder that coated the wigs, meant to signal purity, was often made of starch or ground bone. Mixed with sweat, it hardened into a crust that smelled of decay. Servants reported finding colonies of vermin nesting within the wigs when they were finally set aside for cleaning. And it was not just wigs. Natural hair fared no better. Oily scalp, unwashed for weeks or months, provided a paradise for parasites. Women concealed the crawling beneath elaborate headpieces decorated with feathers and jewels. Men carried perfumed handkerchiefs to wave near their faces, not just to smell pleasant, but to block the stench rising from their own heads. A noble at court was never truly alone. He carried a living community of creatures with him. Nowhere did this grotesque pageantry reach greater heights than at Versailles. To the world, the palace was a symbol of civilization's triumph. Its marble halls gleamed, its gardens stretched like visions of paradise, its fountains sparkled in the sun. But beneath the surface, Versailles was a cesspit. The palace was built without enough toilets for the thousands who lived and worked there. Chamber pots overflowed, their contents dumped into hallways, courtyards, or even behind curtains. Visitors spoke of corridors reeking of human waste, of noble ladies lifting their skirts to relieve themselves in stairwells. The glittering chandeliers could not mask the stench. Water, again, was treated as an enemy. The palace fountains displayed it in abundance, but drinking water was scarce and often contaminated. Residents relied on wine or beer, believing it safer. The result was constant sickness, stomach ailments, and outbreaks of disease. The grandeur of Versailles was therefore built upon contradiction, perfection above, filth below. And yet, for the courtiers who lived there, this was normal. Generations were raised in the palace, trained to equate powdered wigs with beauty, perfume with cleanliness, filth with dignity. Children grew up watching their parents scratch lice beneath jeweled crowns, or step delicately around piles of refuse as if it were a minor inconvenience. Versailles did not just shelter royalty, it educated them, shaping their sense of reality until the grotesque felt natural. From the outside, subjects saw only the fairy tale. The Sun King glowing in golden robes, queens parading in gowns of silk and pearls, aristocrats shimmering beneath candlelight as violins played in endless halls of mirrors. But step a little closer, and the illusion shattered. The glow was the powder of rotting wigs. The gowns hid unwashed skin. The music echoed over a palace where rats scurried through corridors heavy with stench. The myth of royalty was sustained not by hygiene or purity, but by distance. The peasants who gazed at Versailles from afar saw only marble and gold. They could not smell the waste in its corners or see the fleas leaping from powdered wigs. And so, generation after generation, they believed in the fairy tale. But truth always finds cracks. By the 18th century, as Enlightenment ideas spread, whispers turned into accusations. How could rulers who lived in filth claim divine right? How could those who poisoned the poor with their gifts pretend to be protectors? When revolutions came, they carried not only political fury, but the memory of centuries of degradation. The fall of monarchies was not just about taxes or tyranny. It was also about the collapse of the illusion that kings and queens were anything more than human beings. Human beings who, for all their crowns and titles, had lived and died in filth. And that is perhaps the most sobering lesson of all. Strip away the perfume, the wigs, the golden palaces, and what remains is not majesty, but fragility. The royals of Europe were not gods on earth. They were men and women trapped in gilded cages of their own making. Cages that smelled of rot, echoed with whispers of sickness, and eventually collapsed under the weight of their own lies. Thank you for staying with us through this journey into the hidden side of history. If you enjoyed this story and would like to explore more untold truths of the past, please remember to give this video a like. It helps more people discover our work. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Each week we bring you new stories, quiet, detailed, and often forgotten, that reveal the world as it truly was.